But today I want to talk to you about the year 2008. The year 2008 is a pretty pivotal year for a lot of people for a number of different reasons. But honestly, I'm not here to talk about the Wall Street crash or anything like that, so you can all relax. The reason 2008 is an important year for me, though, is because it was the summer of 2008 that I got my first smartphone. And it was a purchase that, looking back, was going to change the rest of my life. So today I want to talk to you about how these little devices and the social media platforms that we've kind of grown to see as inseparable from them have affected the course of an entire generation in the last 10 years, 12 years. So at 23 years old, I often think of myself as a member of the Guinea pig generation. We're the first generation that experienced young adolescence, young adulthood, in the shadow of a rapid and often quite unregulated explosion in this new phenomenon of communication technologies. It's called, we've been calling it the era of smartphones and social media. Frankly, I think the words smart and social are used quite generously. So you're probably thinking, yeah, okay, fine, but this isn't really a generational thing. And to a degree, you're right. I'm sure most of you sitting in the audience would never dream of leaving your houses today without your phones. In fact, they're probably quite close to you right now. They might be in your bags, maybe still in your pockets. They might even be in your hands right now. Maybe at the back of your mind, you're kind of hoping that I'd hurry up and finish this talk so you could check a message that probably just got in WhatsApp.
No way.
So what I'm trying to say is I understand that these digital urges are actually really powerful regardless of your age. So I'm not trying to lay claim here to a unique type of victimhood. But I would like to unpack some things we know about what the science says about young brains and addiction. So it's well established that for the first 25 years that we're alive, our brains undergo this thing called rewiring. The US National Institute of Health recently put out a study that said our prefrontal cortexes, which is part of our brain that's most implicated with addiction and drug-seeking behavior, is under a state of absolute development, rewiring, and consolidation for the first 25 years that we're alive. And really significant changes take place in our limbic system, which is also the part of the brain that has more to do with impulse control, risk-seeking, emotions. So what does this mean? It really means that for the first 25 years, addictive behaviors that we pick up have incredibly long-lasting effects. So for instance, a teenager who turns to heavy smoking or to heavy drinking to cope with the anxiety of growing up is liable to revisit those habits later on when they're faced with similar stress or similar anxiety. So basically what I'm trying to say is addiction or substance abuse is not really something that people grow out of. It's more something that they grow up with, or rather that they grow into. Luckily for most of you in the audience, or let me say a lot of you in the audience, you will have grown up at a time when traditional and very well documented forms of activities associated with addiction, so like the simple ones like smoking, drinking, gambling, those are treated with a lot of caution. And so I'm sure most of you grew up in countries that have really strict age restrictions for all of that. And the reason that is because people wanted to stop adolescents from being able to access and feed that addiction at a young age. Why? Because we know what the science says about addiction, that it's incredibly problematic and that it has a longevity of its own when dealing with young people. Now I want to turn to what we know about digital addiction. Now this is a headline from The Guardian, 2018. Social media copies gambling methods to create psychological cravings. Jeez. These sorts of headlines are becoming more and more commonplace, especially in light of increased criticism for these sorts of companies. Natasha Schull, who's the author of a book called Addiction by Design, notes that Facebook, Twitter, and other companies of their ilk copy a lot of tactics from Las Vegas casinos to keep their users glued to their sites. A former design engineer at Google by the name of Tristan Harris notes that motion you see on the screen, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. That motion that we do to swipe to refresh, maybe our Instagram feeds or our news feeds. Yeah, that shows a nervingly similar mechanism to a Las Vegas slot machine. Wow. Where you pull it down and you wait for your enticing reward. Maybe it's new content, maybe it's a photo of a dog. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's nothing. So, I don't think this should be altogether too surprising because social media companies do have a team of people called attention engineers. I mean, that's what they're nicknamed. But their sole purpose is to attract as much of our attention from these apps as possible. What I'm trying to underline is that the science and the research is catching up about social media and digital addiction. And honestly, with each passing study, we understand that the engagement that we have with social media and digital, and just digital devices in general, shares a lot of parallels to more traditional forms of addiction as well. Okay, so I want to show you two different photos. The first is this. So this photo is from St. Louis, Missouri, 1910. You see two very well-dressed little boys smoking cigarettes. And I think for a lot of you in this audience, this is a pretty shocking photo, right? Because these kids are what, 10 or 12? Knowing what we know now, yeah, it's an incredibly shocking photo. But I think we need to contextualize this photo as well a little bit. So 1910. 1910 is actually 55 years or so before the Surgeon General in America released his final report, conclusive study, which showed that smoking cigarettes was an addictive activity that had irreparable health damages. So knowing what we know now, we can look back and think, what the hell were the parents thinking? But honestly, at the time, they were oblivious to the long-term implications. Now I want to show you another photo. This one's a screenshot. It's a screenshot of the day that I got Facebook. December 31st, 2008. I was 12. And my brother, who was sitting in the same room, was 10. Not sure why he decided to comment on this post. But this is, so my brother and I opened up our Facebook accounts on the same day, and actually my mom opened hers on the same day. So did my grandma. We were all sitting in the same room. Now, I'm not here to lay blame, because they too, they didn't know what we were getting into. They didn't know what the long-term implications of this were. But what I can say is that since that day, December 31st, 2008, not a single day has gone by that I haven't had a psychological craving for a quick glance at Facebook or a mindless scroll on one of its first cousins. To illustrate my point, I'm going to show you something quite embarrassing. This is a screenshot of the time that I've spent on my phone. It's this wonderful feature that my smartphone has. This is the number of times that I picked up my smartphone on Sunday, the 23rd of February.
Wow.
274 times I picked up my phone. This is a phone that belongs to someone who's standing right here delivering a speech about digital addiction. What I'm trying to tell you, what I think the main takeaway from that is that, honestly, awareness doesn't really seem to be enough. I'm super aware of my addiction. That doesn't mean that I'm spending any less time on it. It just means that I'm doing it and I'm filled with self-loathing. So, what I think is that there needs to be a far more strong reaction on the part of teachers, on the part of parents, on the part of governments even, to treat digital addiction the same way that we treat more traditional forms of addiction. I think that this is why I call ourselves the guinea pig generation. It's because we were sort of toss the keys to the digital liquor cabinet or toss the digital packs of cigarettes before people really understood what the implications of what we were doing were. So what I'd like to tell parents sitting in the audience is that awareness of the problem really isn't enough sometimes. And it's going to take more concerted effort and a sustained effort in order for, like, I don't want to go back to this, but I don't want parents of this generation to feel like the parents of the kids in St. Louis, Missouri, 1910. I don't think that we have to wait 50 years for a conclusive study that says social media was the new drug on the block. I don't think we need to wait for a study that says 8 years of buzzes and vibrations and posts is going to affect our attention spans in really irreparable and long-term ways. I don't think that we have to wait. You can hear my testimony as a member of a generation that grew up under Mr. Zuckerberg's watch. When I look around, what I see is a very normalized state of addiction, and I think we need to take action on that accordingly. So, I want to leave you on this image. Look at those 3 idiots who forgot their phones in the back. No, but seriously, as a parent, I think as a parent, if you look at this photo and you think deep down, or maybe you don't even think you know deep down that you want your kid to be the person in back admiring the art and not the person sitting on their phones, I'm really sorry to tell you, but this is going to take concerted effort on your part. You can't trust someone our age to dictate how long they're spending on their phones, because these devices are designed to be addictive. So we need to treat them as such. I think it's asking too much of kids to self-regulate, just because of what we know about young brains, the adolescent brain, and addiction.
Yeah.
So if you want your kid to be the kid in the back, it's going to take concerted effort. They might hate you a little bit for it, but trust me, they're going to thank you later on. And honestly, history is going to thank you as well. Okay, I'm done. You can check your phones now.